Good evening, and welcome to the second part of Essence of Wonder with Gadi Evron. This evening's topic is leadership in crisis, and for our second panel, we examine how we might do better in the future, how we adapt after things have happened, and what we can do, what we can put in place for future events. Our guests for this panel are Jeannie Patrick Smith, Ellen Montgomery, Vince Docherty, Patty Wells, and Dragos Royu. Specifically, leading this panel will be Christopher Garcia. Chris, please take it away.
Hi there. Okay, so great to be here right now. Thrown into at the last minute, but I am ready and willing, and we're gonna do stuff. So let's just have you all introduce yourselves. Hugo Award winner, Helen. We're twinsies. Why don't you introduce yourself first, really quick, since they know who you are.
Sure. I'm Helen Montgomery. I am currently calling in from Seattle, where I live, although in my heart, I am always a Midwestern girl from Detroit and Chicago. I've been working on conventions for 20 years. I have been working on Worldcon since 2004, and most recently was the events division head for Dublin. And I'm currently the co-bid chair for the Chicago in 2022 Worldcon bid.
Excellent.
And professionally, I'm a psychiatric social worker, so I'm well used to crises.
Fantastic. Hey, Patty, how are you?
I'm unmuting and I'm fine. I'm Patty Wells and I'm from Portland, Oregon, but I chaired the Reno Worldcon in 2011, have worked many cons over more years than I'm going to share. And recently, Randy Shepard and I were brought in to help with platform services for Con Zealand to help with the switch over to doing a virtual con. And in my real life, I've been a crisis counselor, a psychiatric social worker, a teacher of autistic children, and a college professor.
Wow. Hey, Vince Docherty out in The Hague. Tell us about yourself real quick.
Hi there, and hope you can hear me okay from such a long distance. So yeah, I'm Vincent Docherty. I first attended a convention in 1978 at the age of 16, and it's been uphill ever since. I've chaired or co-chaired lots of conventions, the two Glasgow Worldcons in 95 and 2005. I've worked at various levels in other conventions. I ran a couple of Dutch conventions here as well, where I live. Hopefully planning to bring the SMOFCon, which is the annual kind of convention for convention organizers, to Europe next year, hopefully if all the travel restrictions are lifted. And in my day job, although I'm a scientist by training, I do kind of like organizational work and coaching for a very large energy company. So for whom, shall we say, the last week has also been very exciting. So yeah, life is always full of interesting challenges, and I'm always keen to try and do some new things as well.
Excellent. Okay, let's go to one of the two people I don't know on this call. Dragos? I'm sorry.
Any of the above will work. How's
Yes.
that audio going? All right. So here, let's, I guess, introduce myself a little bit. I don't have a Hugo Award, but I do have an Emmy Award. For a product I produced that did the MPEG analysis, and I also brought a present for Gadi. So I had a chance to do a little bit late. I'm sorry I didn't get you fancy sound effects for this, but here we go. Ooh, it's a little slow.
Essence of Wonder.
For those of us who do not have video right now or are listening to this in the podcast later on, we just saw really cool graphics displayed by Dragos.
Yeah, I made Gadi a title scene, a little bit of a Star Trekian kind of an homage. Yeah. Anyway, so I organize conference. I do computer security. I've worked in network stuff and sniffers and analyzers for decades now. I'm a computer security dinosaur. I also organize a conference called CanSecWest, which is held every year in Vancouver and was recently held on March 19th in Vancouver, and which is one of the reasons I guess I'm here to talk about some of those experiences. You know, I've got a fancy title slide. So, and a title inspired by the late John Brunner, which was one his job description of the guy who wrote the first worm and was documented in the 1976 book was systems rationalizer. So I stole that little title, and we'll see if the slide actually gets off the screen. Of course, it's being slow just when it's not being needed. I also organize another conference in Tokyo called PACSEC. I've been doing CanSecWest for 21 years. Oh, there we go. I have recently trying to pivot a lot of stuff to go virtual. I guess that's about it for me now, and I'll let somebody else talk.
And we'll have a lot to talk about at some point, because I spent 20 years as a computer historian, specializing in computer graphics, music, and art, and happen to be good friends with folks like Cliff Stoll and Rivest and all those folks. So, but let's go up into the corner for me. Ginny, wait, I hear you have a book sitting behind you?
Oh my gosh, Gadi. Yes, I have a book sitting back here. That's one of my recent ones, but that's what I do. All right, I am Ginny Smith, and I'm one of the co-chairs for the World Fantasy Convention this year. It'll be at the end of October in Salt Lake City. I live in Kentucky, but my co-chair and my partner, Deanne Larson, lives in Salt Lake. I was in Salt Lake when we got the bid to host the World Fantasy Convention, but through a long story, I moved to Kentucky. So I am in the Midwest, and I'm doing it long distance. And I am I'm definitely the least experienced person on this call. Neither Deanne nor I have ever run a convention. This will be our first. So lucky us, we get the convention the year of the pandemic.
Well, that is great to see so many folks. And I'm just going to say this to begin with. One of the things that I'm going to wrap up with is this question. What do major events look like in 2022 and beyond? So keep that in your mind, as that's what we're going to be drilling towards. But I really think where we're going to start is right now, we all are sort of in a holding pattern. And where does that holding pattern sort of start with you folks? Where do you see your ability to drive your individual projects forward? And let's start with Helen.
So we are bidding to bring the Worldcon to Chicago in 2022. Our vote this year is this year and was supposed to be in New Zealand. It is now a virtual vote. So the very first pivot was working with ConZealand to figure out how to do site selection when we're not there in person. At the moment, what I'm finding two struggles. One is because we don't exactly know how ConZealand is going to go. That's making some planning, putting a lot of planning on hold. And then just kind of hoping by 2022 all will be well and we can move forward. But in the back of my head, starting to think about, okay, what do we do if things aren't back to quote unquote normal? The other struggle that I'm having is because of what's going on in the world, I'm finding it really difficult to think that far forward and to feel like this sort of thing is actually important right now. People's lives are in such chaos and in so many places that the idea of saying, oh, well, I need you to work on my bid is like, it just doesn't feel very important. And so those are the two things that I'm struggling with as looking forward into the unknown.
And Ginny, actually, how are you sort of dealing with that? Because you're a much closer time frame. You're just after my birthday, so I don't know that means nothing to anyone else. But how does that? 6 months. That's right. You got 6 months out.
Yeah, we're 6 months away, and being brand new at this, at first, I think I didn't communicate enough because I was kind of in denial. It's like, we're 8 months away. It's going to be gone by then. So we just kind of you know, sucked in a little bit. And then this thing isn't going away. So obviously that was obvious. So what we're doing right now is contingency planning. We don't know what it's going to look like. I think we all know that, but we have to be prepared for what happens if we take the route of Cancellations and we go completely virtual. We want to be ahead of the game, so we are actually we're doing demos for platforms, and you know, what is that going to look like for us? What is it going to look like if we go partially? If we have an in-person event and we offer a virtual option, and what does that do to memberships? And what does that do to our income? Which is, you know, World Fantasy Con is each year is run by an independent group, and this group, our group, is brand new. So we have no seed money. We have nothing. We are totally dependent on our budget, dependent on memberships. And so that's a big question for us right now. But all we're really trying to do is identify what might happen and be prepared to make the decisions and be prepared to move at the point where we need to make that decision.
Interesting. And so, Vince, I have to ask you, because I actually don't know the answer to this. Have you ever been a part of an event that had to cancel due to outside forces?
Yeah, several. In fact, several recently. Although in some cases, you know, cancellation is then cancellation and replacement, or cancellation and deferment or postponement. But yeah, as I think over, you know, the decades, I'm aware of any number of smaller conventions, for instance, which have either stopped or have radically downsized, for instance. A lot of them triggered by the conversation that we had earlier, which is, you know, something that had started as a fun thing for a certain group grew exponentially too fast and then crashed back down. People who've been around for a while will remember the famous Boscone from Hell, or the Minicon as well, that did that. But actually some recent Worldcons have also increased in size so much that they've had to respond very quickly and cut back as well. And of course, with the world as it is now, which for many people is in the West or in first world countries is their first experience of something like this, it's forcing a major rethink on some quite fundamental things. I mean, in some ways, you know, we have to look at the models that we have. You know, conventions are all about still face-to-face meetings and socializing and stuff, and then that stretches back to what, the 1930s and before. But what I found interesting is, you know, even last week I was running an event in work that was planned to be face-to-face, and it was people in the US and the UK and the Netherlands, and we made it all virtual. And even using off-the-shelf technologies, it worked really, really well. And in fact, the feedback we got at the end of it was, we could have done this all along. You know, the stuff that was out there. And sometimes it takes a crisis, you know, the phrase, don't waste a crisis, but sometimes it takes a crisis to actually force you to rethink these things. And having said that, I'm well aware of how privileged I am. And in fact, most of us are. You know, I expect half the people in the world probably don't even have the choices that we have, or even the ability to attend, you know, events like these. So, you know, we have to keep it in a sense of context as well. You know, we do this because it's fun, or it should be fun, and we should keep adapting to it. But I would absolutely say, you know, given what we're experiencing, don't waste it. Yeah, let's really build from it. Let's see what works, what doesn't work, and always remember what's the first principle that you're trying to do. I mean, convention started as, you know, social gatherings for aficionados of certain fiction, and you know, we're now 80 years down the line. You know, people are planning for the 100th anniversary in 2039. So, you know, let's take advantage of it.
Good point. And oh no, hold on. So no, what's going on? Sorry. Oh, good. My screen blacked out. Which is probably a security leak. Hey, Dragos, that was for you. Let's ask you a question.
Well, let's see what Party Robot has to say. Okay. So, you know, okay, I've been wondering when to jump in, because I think one of the reasons Gadi invited me here was because we recently had to go through this about a month ago, when we had our conference scheduled on the cusp of everything shutting down in Vancouver. Here, it's time for my live tag here. We're live in Vancouver. So what we actually had to do was be prepared for kind of all eventualities. We wound up having a conference that kind of gradually reduced itself as everybody canceled out, and that turned into something that became all only virtual. So we actually have there's Fast Company did a story on it. A journalist named Seth Rosenblatt has some videos and some pictures up there of our virtual conference, playing to empty rooms. We had a whole hotel to ourselves. It was quite an interesting experience because we got to have our online party. We had some DJs booked for lunch, and we cranked the stereo up so we could hear it several floors away in the hotel bar. And there literally was no one there to give a noise complaint. There was only a few lonely staffers roaming the hallways. We'd prepaid for everything, so at this point, lots of interesting experiences have been happening with force majeure clauses in conferences. I've actually been speaking with another colleague of mine, Hugo, who organized a conference in Montreal, and his conference is scheduled for June, and he literally had to cancel for force majeure because the government seized the hotel that he had a contract in and made it an emergency test center in downtown Montreal, in the square right outside where his hotel is, and all the staffers are now hiding, sort of isolating themselves in that hotel. He literally cannot throw his conference. Wow. So he is the first time I've actually heard of the force majeure clause is supposed to be the government, military action is the standard definition of it. This is literally the actual definition of force majeure. But other than, I think Wimbledon got event insurance out of this. I don't think that there's a lot of remedies for folks who have contracts and conferences already in progress. I'm currently at an interesting decision myself because I have a conference that normally happens in Tokyo in November, the second week of November. There's a trio of computer security conferences called Code Blue, AV Tokyo, and PACSEC. We've been doing PACSEC for about 17 years now, and PACSEC, the Code Blue is the national, sort of more Japanese conference, and PACSEC is a sort of more international folks. We also do a competition there, and the contract deadlines are hitting us right about now, and we have to make that decision. What do we do? Do we plan on everything lifting by November, or right now folks going into Narita and Tokyo have to stay overnight in cardboard boxes with bedrooms for one night while they get their test results. It's not really the most conducive environment for travel, and under those circumstances I don't think we'd expect anyone internationally to attend. So good question. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about the call about the conference in November now.
Yeah, and that's something actually I will come to because it ties into something I planned for a little later. But good guessing. Now, Patty, actually, you have a very interesting day job as a crisis counselor.
Well, it's not a day job at this time. My day job is being a teacher, but I can't teach right now.
Same thing.
So I'm going back as a volunteer crisis counselor, texting, because things are blowing up all over the country with people being forced to stay home with each other. Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
Go ahead. No, after you.
It's very interesting to catch what the whole thing is with trying to do that by text, which I'd never done before. I'd always done it in person or by voice, but texting is the new thing.
Oh yeah. Now, it's an interesting concept that when people are in crisis, usually they're not looking forward. But here we have a bunch of groups that have to be looking forward while in various different levels of crisis. And, how does that affect decision-making, you think?
I think it's hard. I think that people always have to make decisions when they're in crisis. But with this, the things I think you need to look at is to step back and go, and I said this in the last panel and I'll keep saying it, that if you can communicate frequently in relatively small bits and very, very clearly, that people are more likely to be able to take the information and cope with it. And that's true of either staff or the people out in the attendee audience who are going, what are you doing with my convention? But just in very, very
that's the guy. Oh no, I lost Patty.
No, you didn't lose me, but I've lost your sound for a minute. I couldn't tell.
Oh, okay. Whew. Okay. As I reassemble myself. Now, this is actually going to be a broad question for everyone. So, when you are looking out from where you're sitting today, do you think you should have been planning differently along the way? And we'll start with Jenny.
Okay, if I had more convention running experience, I might be able to say, oh gosh, why didn't I do this, this, and this? But the point is, I don't. I mean, my very first experience at any convention was last year's Worldcon NASPIC. I ran registration. That was the first time I've ever been involved in con running at any level. So no, I can't say I would have made different decisions, or I can't say, because I don't think we could have predicted this. I was making the best decisions I could at the time, and that's how we're going forward.
We use the slogan, this situation is so dynamic, you can't be flexible because it's far too rigid. You have to be fluid.
Oh, that's a good.
I think that's right. And I think that all of you who have experience with this, you have an advantage because you've been through crises before, you've seen it happen before. So you can be a little bit more fluid. We have a really super cool team, and I've got a lot of experience, and I've also got a lot of young, inexperienced people that are energetic and have a really, really good ideas, and we've tried to pair them up together. And so, you know, we're getting some experience. I don't want to make it sound like we're not, you know, like we don't know what we're doing. We are, but we're drawing heavily on people like you who have done it before, because who knows? I mean, none of us have done this before. You know?
I was going to say, this is brand new, right? You know, there are so many crises that you can just, you know, go ahead and throw me at, and I'll be like, okay, fine, right? I worked in a psych hospital for 11 years, right? I've seen all kinds of things. And so, but this is very new and very different, and we're very reliant, all of the events are very reliant on both federal and local government, and them determining what we can or can't do. And that's something that, you know, it's not even like a decision that we can make, right? We're in many cases waiting for other people to make the decision for us.
Start, I think.
I was going to say, this is about the point where I was say the one thing I was going to say is I probably have been doing this longer than most people here. I guess I've been doing this for 21 years, and I used to do some conferences even before Hewlett Packard before that. So I guess about 25 years I've been doing some kind of conference stuff. And you can't possibly plan for a lot of it. A lot of it is triage. I was going to share a story. I mean, as tough as all this conference stuff is, the hardest thing I've ever done as a conference organizer is we organized a conference in Hong Kong 2 years ago, right before everything blew up. And on the way to the conference, one of our staffers had a hemorrhage on the international flight, and called me to visit the bathroom in the airplane flight that was covered in her blood while they made the announcement for everyone to come out on the flight. Wheeling her through Hong Kong customs on a gurney dripping full of blood, well, was probably about the most stressful thing I've ever done as a conference organizer. And, you know, after that, it's kind of all downhill. It's a lot of triage. There's a lot of, you can't predict anything. So you've always got to have plan A, plan B, plan C. What if this fails? And you're always working towards the end of your time. The incompressible resource is time. Every time you see anyone or put a list of the 10 most stressful jobs in the world, number one is always military general. Fireman is 2 or 3, and somewhere around 8 or 9 is always conference organizers, because everything's always coming at you from all angles, and it's just a matter of constant triage and trying to figure out which is the biggest fire you need to put out at any given time. So this is just another fire. I look at it as an opportunity. I think for us, just having recently gone through it, it pushed us to do a lot of, we've been dragging our feet about doing videos and about organizing a lot of things online because we wanted to maximize the in-person experience, because really for us, it's all about connecting and the relationships. We've had babies that have been attributed to our conferences, and that's probably why one of my greatest achievements as a conference organizers is we've facilitated relationships. All kinds of things happen when you get people in person. So trying to get that, recreate some of that digitally, is something we should have been working on a long time ago. So I think there's a lot of contingencies, but in some ways there's some opportunities as well. So that's my piece on that.
Yeah. And great segue that you didn't know you just made. So you're looking at opportunities now of, is the slate wiped clean? This is a building point where everything is blank, or are we still dealing with the same expectations of what has gone on before to this point? In other words, is this the giant reset button? Vince?
So it might be, and I think an important thing to realize in this particular case is, conventions of all types have obviously evolved with the times. But if we think about what this current crisis is forcing on us, it's to, stay physically in one place and to virtualize as much as possible. Now, we've had that technology for a long time, but it was always an add-on to what we were doing. Now it's, for the most part, the only thing that we can do. So the question, I don't think the question's answered yet. We'll have to see. It depends how long this lasts. But I think for a lot of people, it has been an eye-opening that, if you have access to that technology, a lot of it's pretty ubiquitous now, that in fact, maybe it's not an add-on anymore. And as we think about events going into the future, maybe building that in as a permanent part may become how we do a lot of these things. There could be a lot of reasons for it. If you take the climate crisis seriously, potentially there are restrictions on travel, international travel in the future anyway. So how do you have those engagements? Well, you use the technology that you have to do it, and it becomes the platform for a lot of things. I don't know whether it will keep going like that, or whether, as and when the restrictions are slowly released, there'll be a kind of, the pendulum will swing back. I don't know. I don't think anybody does. We will see what happens as this or that city or region or country begins to open up again. But for me, one of the big things I've learned from it is, we did treat this as an add-on before, but maybe it's a part of the core as we go on.
How about you, Helen? What's your thoughts?
Human beings are not big fans of change. There's the joke in fandom, right? If you do it twice, it's now a tradition. And it has to be done that way now over and over and over again. And I think that after this, we're going to see a lot of people want things to go back to how they were. I think there will be some backlash to the idea of making changes and having things be virtual instead of in person. I think for a while conventions will, have more hand sanitizer in the consuite, but not much more than that, But it's interesting because, one of what Vince said about climate change, but then one of the other things that I've been thinking about and starting to see a little bit on is the idea that going virtual also allows for more accessibility for a lot of people who can't travel to conventions but still want to be part of that fandom or that event. And I'm hoping that maybe we can use, since accessibility has become such a big thing in fandom now, right, and trying to make events more accessible, that maybe we'll be able to use that as a reason to continue to move forward with some of the virtual experience. But I think there's definitely going to be some blowback to it.
Okay.
I think the technology is very mature right now. I think that we don't have a lot of things that I mean, take a look at this session we have right here. I'm getting, you know, I'm glad to meet all of you lovely people and fantastic, brilliant minds. And we're getting to interact with folks, but the folks who are listening and watching this, they don't get to talk amongst each other. They don't get to have that sense of audience and the cohesion that we get. And I think that we're still a little bit in early days of this technology. I mean, I think that there's technological things that can be done to improve those experiences, and we're going to see those probably emerging from this crisis and this push that we're having right now. We're already seeing lots of creativity and innovation in the way we're organizing. It's gonna push us to do some things, but it's gonna be difficult to recreate that physical reaction. I agree with the blowback comment. I think there's going to be a pendulum that's going to be swinging back. It's just a matter of when is the big question on everyone's mind, right?
Excellent. Okay, now let's downshift a little bit to a different realm. What sort of methodologies are you using to communicate with your staff and your attendees both? And what sort of balancing are you doing with that? Ginny.
Unmute. We have a Slack channel, and that was again one of the ideas of one of our younger and innovative people, and we're all loving it, absolutely love it. So we're in communication quite a bit as a team. We also still use email, group emails a lot as a committee. With our attendees, we have, of course, our website naturally, but we also have MailChimp, and we do regular mailings, you know, the typical stuff. It was funny, I was listening to the earlier session, and Patty and I think Steve were talking about communication and how absolutely vital it is, even communicating to say, we don't know what's happening. But, you know, I was sitting here making notes thinking, okay, we got to have a mailing going out next week, because I think that is critical. I think it's absolutely critical to maintain that communication, as you all said, both with the committee and with your attendees, so that they know, even if you don't have the answers, they have confidence that you're looking into it. They have confidence that you care about their safety and you care about their opinions, and hopefully have a two-way communication, be available when people have questions.
How about you, Helen?
So, you know, one of the questions you asked earlier is about, you know, should we have been doing different things differently? And one of the places that I know that I haven't done well in terms of being a bid chair is sort of the communication to the membership. I'm not a huge expert on social media and how that all works and all of that stuff. And my social media person had to step away from the bid and everything. And so we just kind of let it hang out there, right? And we weren't super worried because we were seeing everybody in person at conventions, right? And so now we're suddenly needing to do that pivot to reach our supporters, you know, and that's proving to be a tremendous amount of work. And had we been more on it at the beginning, life would certainly be easier now. And so, you know, and part of now is, you know, should we win the vote, I want to make sure that we do have a lot of that in place and built up already in terms of social media, because that's going to make it easier to reach potential attendees, because I don't think that by the end of July, any of this is going to be very different, right? We're not going to have that in-person, you know, fan table or whatnot. So, so in terms of reaching out to supporters and whatnot, I'd say that's the big thing. As far as my bid committee, you know, I'm trying to ramp up more email stuff for them and letting them know that, you know, I'm available for questions and all. But as I said, you know, it's been kind of a struggle for me to focus on this and to feel like it's important. And I definitely, that has definitely had an impact just in my own coping with this whole thing and how I'm, you know, trying to lead to the group, but at the same time, you know, pull everything else together in my life. So.
Dragos, thoughts?
I was going to say, actually, I do have some thoughts about that. We're seeing a lot of things just basically going slower. I mean, we're still in some ways finishing our conference. We had one situation where our instructor changed his flight and decided to go back to India because they're about to close the border. So he had 9 students of his actually fly to our conference to go take a training course. And so the students show up, but the instructors didn't. This was the day before everything shut down in Vancouver. So we've been trying to basically connect up all the wiring, all the equipment. His course was about hacking into Internet of Things equipment, and so we've basically been working on wiring things up. But the bottom line is that everything's kind of going slower. Everybody's got to deal with all this readjustment in home life. You know, struggling to get groceries has become this enormous adventure now, you know, depending on where you live and what you do. So there's this sort of like this enormous friction on all the plans. It's, you know, as another cliche I trot out all the time, what a plan is a list of things you're probably not going to do. So everything has been like stretched out. It's like we wrote our plans on rubber bands, and it's taking a lot longer to do anything right now. It's kind of like we pressed reset on all the calendars, and nobody has a clue on when things really gonna happen.
Oh, great.
My thought.
Okay. I want to move to a section about risk, and I'm going to start with Vince because he understands risk. Also, the game Risk. We've never played, but I challenge you officially now the next time we're at a con. Vince, when you were looking at scenarios where things are so bubbly, when do you make your moves? When do you place the call to either cancel or go forward?
You used the right word, scenarios. You know, scenarios are about how you stress test your plans. And, you know, if you're wise and, you know, you cover the kind of likely risks, then you're setting yourself up for being able to prevent things even before they happen. And also, you know how you'd mitigate them if they had. And practicing that with your team and your committee is great. And sometimes what happens in real life is just so big. It is, you know, as somebody said, you know, it's the black swan event, and you need to realize that, you know, that you have a plan. You know, it's not going to survive contact with reality. You need to give people time to adjust as well. The point that was made around, you know, uncertainty is something that creates an emotional drag. Yeah. And that's why communication is so important, even especially if you're uncertain, because you're being honest. You know, you're showing that, you know, you're in it as well. And I would say that, you know, the content part of planning has already been touched on. You know, if you're a convention, you've got plans, you've got commitments, you've got contracts. Some of those you can put into force majeure. Some of them, like the British National this year, they couldn't trigger that until government policy forced the hotel to officially cancel, and then they could do all of those things. So some of it's kind of like timeline or kind of like content driven, but more important is, you know, for the predictable risks, for the known knowns, that should be part of your planning anyway, and you should have a few fallback cases. Those generally have been things like, you know, your guest of honor doesn't turn up, or you get more memberships or fewer memberships than you planned. When it's something as big as this, absolutely, what Dragos was saying and others have said, you need to build, you need to understand that you and everybody else, whether you're an organizer or you're an attendee, you've got other things in your life you need to deal with, and you then really need to prioritize and understand what your options are. And I think also most important, you've got to listen. You know, the communication tends to be by communication tends to be thought of as, we communicate in our organization, we communicate out to our members. If ever there's a time for us to need to be listening more to help guide us on what's working, it's now. Yeah. Now that can be tactical. It can be about channels. You know, pre-internet, pre-PCs. You know, you went to a face-to-face event because that was pretty much the only game in town. But it doesn't mean that every individual interacted with everybody else and did all the things. You still have preferences. You have communication preferences. So you need to think about the channels that you have and who are the people who are in that. You know, if Twitter is the equivalent of the smokers lounge on the balcony, I'm just, and others are the equivalents of, shall we say, the introverts in the kitchen. The channels that you have, you need to think through them, and you need to think about what capacity you've got, and you need to listen to people. One extreme, the Twitter users, where an hour is a lifetime, and others who are across a whole spectrum. You've got to listen to them, and create space in your own life and your organizers to do that more than ever now, because absolutely uncertainty is an absolute killer. We all crave
trust is
certainty.
important too, I think.
Yeah,
Trust in your team members. I think that this is the one thing that we experience, is that it really stresses out all of, everybody gets stressed out and people have to run away, and the trust that you've built in the past is probably the biggest antidote to the uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. That's
Absolutely.
a very, very good point. Jenny, let me ask you actually, since you are the folks who are facing the risk head on at the moment, it's coming down the track like a train, not to make you paranoid.
Oh, thanks.
But, but how are you actually addressing it and moving forward? And how do you have like a set of things that need to happen before you pull the lever on whatever the next step is going to be?
We actually do. We are working on that. Deanne and I have, my co-chair and I have worked very hard on coming up with, we have 4 options we're looking at. If we cancel, what are the financial impacts? What do we have to do here, here, and here? And what are the decision points that we make prior to making that decision? If we end up, and what I personally think is we're going to end up with an in-person event, but we're also going to have some virtual options. I mean, it's 6 months away. But if we do that, if we have an in-person event, we have a list of things that we need to work on with the hotel. I don't think social distancing is going away between now and the end of October. So think of a panel room with 300 people sitting chair by chair by chair. That's not going to happen. We have to be able to make people feel safe. And so we actually do. We have a list of, if this happens, here's our options. If this happens, here's what we need to check into. Here's our options. And, is it a complete list? No, but we're doing our absolute best to try to make sure we're thinking of everything. And we don't even know what our decision date is at this point. We don't know. We are moving forward as we're having a convention. We know we are. And even if we don't, we have certain things that we're still going to do and still going to offer to our members. So we're absolutely focusing on those timelines and like putting together Gantt charts and the whole 9 yards and dependency. So
nice. Hey,
Gadi,
you had something. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Just a question. Since there's 2 of us who are trying to make that decision about the conference, when's your conference, Ginny? November?
October 29th through November 1st.
Oh, okay, so I'm November 4th and 5th. So let's take a poll amongst the people here. A thumbs up or thumbs down? Are we going to be out of restrictions by the end of October? Let's see what
To the attendees as well. People
You
in the
guys are
chat.
not making me feel better, all right?
Seriously, let's open it. There's
I
probably
don't think we will be out of restrictions. I think there will still be restrictions, but am I confident at this point? Absolutely. We're going to have a convention, folks.
Yeah, I've got the other complications. My conference is in Tokyo, so I've got lots more complicated. You said where are you based out of?
Well, our convention is in Salt Lake. I'm in Kentucky, but our guest of honor is Stephen Gallagher from the UK. We've got people coming. We're the World Fantasy Convention. We have a lot of worldwide members, so it is an issue. I mean, it is a consideration.
Let's open it up also to the attendees. I think there is probably in this panel alone probably 200 years of experience in con running, but let's open it up to a couple thousand. So people I know Ben Yellow has been writing and sharing his experience, and others. So what do you think? What are the restrictions going to be if the con is going to be able to happen at the end of the year? And we'll come back to that a little bit later.
I think that whatever the first couple conventions are, you know, there's still probably going to be wearing masks.
Mhm.
And I think those conventions must work with their t-shirt vendors to get masks with their convention logo on it that you can just hand out to every attendee when they show up.
What a
I think
great
it's going to change
idea.
food service.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't get the t-shirt anymore. Now you get a mask.
Yeah.
And see, I think from some of the reading I've been doing that one of the restrictions that's going to stay in place the longest is large events. We're talking about things like concerts and stadium events, but what are they defining as large events? If they say over 1,000, I also have an event in November, Worldcon. If they say over 1,000, that right there cuts Worldcon off.
Mhm.
But if they say over 2,000, then we have to make the decision, and I don't know how it'll go.
That's a good and interesting point that
It's
we
so
also
much
have to.
regional jurisdiction based, right? You know, some places, states up here, it's our local province of BC. It's not federal, national. In Japan, it's federal and national. It's all kind of complicated.
Okay, since we looks like we've got about 6 minutes, somewhere in there, I want to start with the big question, I think. What do y'all see as being, what will cons look like in 2025? And let's start with Dragos.
Well, it's funny because I was trying to think through all this. What changes as a result of this? One thing for sure is that I think that we're all going to be much more conscious about con flus. So I'm planning on we're doing IR monitoring of the conference. We're doing we're going to have temperature check guns around. That's something that's probably going to stay around. We're going to have a camera and we're going to look for people with a fever. That's something that I've already decided is a technological choice. Probably we'll be giving away masks at the front desks. I think that.
Hold on, Dragos, I'm gonna cut you off right there. You do realize the amount of privacy concerns that's gonna cause a lot of attendees just to have a camera monitoring them with IR, infrared.
So you know what we were planning on doing is we're actually just going to have that projected on a screen, so that it's not actually sent anywhere, just locally. So everybody in the crowd can see everybody else's in the crowd's temperature. And if there's a hot spot, we'll let the crowd deal with it.
What just happened?
In the security world, especially at DEFCON, we have this thing where everybody laugh it up, but we have this thing called the wall of sheep, where essentially.
I have a 3-year-old that just entered the room and started playing on a synthesizer. I'll back out for a second.
You can bring him along. We're in an online live right now, and we like 3-year-olds. But at DEFCON, there is a wall of sheep where essentially you display the passwords to everybody connected via wireless who are not encrypted. So in the security world, that might be more acceptable. And I love the sounds coming out from Dragos over there.
That's awesome.
But back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Gadi. Patty.
It's not a virtual meeting until the cat or the kid interrupts.
I got the cat earlier.
I know, we've now
The
got both.
husband
So we're good.
earlier, so yeah.
I raised 3 of them.
Well-
I can keep talking through anything.
Well, welcome to the convention of the future.
Yeah.
In reality, I think we're going to see a lot more hybrid events. A lot more that we can go back to having smaller events with some social distancing or some precautions. But I, for instance, have a couple of health problems where even if Worldcon returns, I'm not sure that I should go to it. And I think we'll find enough that we have to start putting in some virtual aspects because of travel restrictions, health restrictions, something else we've never heard of before, because 2020 is certainly the year for it.
We're dealing with that now, Patty. One of my guests is, we're in negotiations right now, but I have a feeling is going to be a virtual guest. because of, some, health concerns and travel issues and so on. So I think that's very real, and I don't think that's going to go away.
It's going to be an interesting pivot budget-wise for a lot of conventions, right? Because doing the virtual stuff is going to cost. And, thinking about then what, so for a lot of conventions in the United States, we have the con suite where we feed people. Particularly in the Midwest, we really like feeding people in the Midwest. And so, that cost will probably drop, but our tech costs are going to go way up. And so I think people trying to figure out the budgeting with that is also going to be a challenge going forward in the next few years, right? What becomes most important to save physically in order to afford doing the virtually?
And I think that's a really good point, Helen. And I also think you have to weigh the factor of membership, attendance, registration. Do you pay, do you charge as much for a virtual attendee as you do for an in-person? Well, no, obviously not. What if you're right in the middle of a convention right now, like we are, Dragos, and I've got people who have paid full price membership and I offer a cheaper virtual option. What do I do? How do I?
What I wound up doing when people wanted to trade their physical tickets to virtual, to give them 4 to 1 deal. That's what we gave them, like 4 passes for their coworkers. That worked out okay.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Thanks.
Our big cost, we do meals at our conference, so our big cost was the catering. So that it was a very complicated equation. So,
Patty, what did New Zealand end up deciding for their virtual rate versus what it had been for attending?
Honest to goodness, I've been so busy learning all the technology stuff I need to learn for virtual con, I can't remember.
300 New Zealand.
But
is that less than an attending had been?
But
that I don't know.
The thing I do want to say is that right now, when I'm not doing this, I'm watching ZoeCon. And the one really hopeful thing out of that as they do their virtual gaming con this weekend is the first thing I wanted to see was the fan expectations and what they thought of it. And they are so positive. People are so grateful to have a convention.
Wow.
So
okay.
I wanted to pop that in there.
Yeah. And a windstorm just started here, which is really fascinating. But I wanted to say thank you to all of you, and also to say what cons of the future are going to look like. We're going back to the single-tracked con, which means it will be possible to bring back the banquet to Worldcons. So just put that out there. Virtually, of course. Yeah.
Well, we will all sit here and eat our dinner together, but apart.
Well, I thought about seeing if there was some kind of alcohol delivery service so you could deliver a shot virtually to all the members and have them do it online that way, but it's kind of iffy to do that.
It'll be kind of hard to do the BarCon thing virtually, don't you think?
So I'll give you an experience because we actually set up a hallway track meeting. So we set up another meeting so people could jump out of the main conference and just meet with each other. That actually worked a little bit, but I'm really focused on trying to figure out how to duplicate those interaction environments. Actually, Gadi's a part of this. We've got a whole discussion with other conference organizers who are all trying to figure out these sorts of things. Maybe I'll get Gadi to pass some other invitations to you folks if you have some interesting ideas. I'd be glad to see you participate.
Well, and there has been BYOB for a long time, so
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it, right, Gadi?
Absolutely. I would like, again, in this panel, I also chose to mostly not interrupt because the experience in this room and the discussion was pretty amazing. I would like to mention a couple of things. One of them, just the question to Patty. So I was running, at the end, I was not running it alone. There were quite a lot of people, the transformation team that built ConZealand to become a virtual con. And then Patty and Randall kind of came in and made this a success. And just specifically about the pricing, ConZealand did lower its price tremendously.
It did, okay.
And is returning money, but I don't want to speak for ConZealand. If you want the information, just go on their website and you'll be able to get it. And you can absolutely email them and they'll be happy to talk to you. A lot of attendees have been very supportive. From my experience, the loud few that are against it kind of grab the attention, but truly the support has been overwhelming. The second thing I wanted to mention was actually James Bacon, who couldn't make it today, unfortunately, to moderate this. Unfortunately for us, Chris could come in and help us. And when I went in for the transformation team in New Zealand, I started working, looking at this. We have 4 months. We got to start running. Let's do project management. Let's create things. And James kind of got me on a call and said, Gadi, empathy. People have just had a loss. People are dealing with a lot of things right now. Empathy. Let them talk to them, listen. This is about the group. I'm now adding my own. This is not what James said, but essentially the basics of it was empathy. Listen, support, do it together as a team. And I would like to finish this conversation, which was very exciting and with a lot of new ideas, with that. So on that note, thank you very much for the panel. Thank you very much, Chris. And to wrap it up right now, and of course, all the various panelists will close their videos and mute themselves, because that's what we do. So on that note, thank you all for coming on the show. I would like to thank Vincent, Chris, David, Stephen, Patty, Randall, Helen, Colette, Dragos, Karen, and Jeannie for all their support today, coming on the panels and the story, of course. And the Essence of Wonder team. Without them, none of this would have happened. On next week's show, though, now that's exciting. We're going to have a show where disasters, even Zoom-oriented disasters with challenges and glitches, will have no power over us. And that's because our special guest will actually be Malka Older. She's an inspiring writer, but more than that, when we opened up her Wikipedia page, my personal jaw, my jaw was, it just dropped. She's a humanitarian worker. She has led the response and disaster response to the most complex emergencies all over the world, in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Japan. It's going to be amazing, and I really look forward to talking to her. And of course, joining us in a show corner will be rhetorical studies professor Steve Yano. And I got to tell you, you have to listen to the rhetorical professor when he speaks. It's going to be pretty interesting. We're also going to have Tammy Coxon with Tammy's Tastings. She's going to teach us how to make some alcohol and mix it up, which is going to be great. And Karen will be back with a reading. So with that, I'm Gadi Evron, and this was Essence of Wonder. Thank you.